All right, in the last video, we talked about doing basic functions like creating a canvas and creating circles and squares. And you might be thinking like, okay, how do we know what these functions are, right? Obviously, you can look at, I gave you some documentation here, but let's say you didn't have my slides. Well, if you go to the P5JS website, this is the homepage here, what you can do is actually go under reference. So what the reference will do is list out every function or eventually variable, which we haven't talked about yet, that is in P5JS. So for instance, right here at the top under shape, these are the functions that create shapes. So you might see that we have circle. Let's open this one up. And you can see first it defines what the function does. It draws a circle. It gives a little bit a background, so for instance, it says a circle is a round shape defined by an x, y, and d, which is diameter parameters. X and y set the location, d sets the width and height. Um, they give some code examples, so you can like literally see the code running. And then they give the syntax. Syntax means this is how you would write the function. Okay, so you would write circle, and then X, Y, and D in this case are the arguments or the information that you would give the function. How do we know what the information is? We'll see where it says parameter. But Mr. Hurwitz, I thought you said it's called an argument. Technically, yes, but this comes up later. So for now, argument and parameter are the same thing. They're technically not, but for the sake of this next couple weeks, just go with me here, okay? This defines what the argument is. So x is a number x coordinate, y is a y coordinate, and then d is a diameter coordinate, okay? So this is how you would look up a function. So even if you didn't know how to use the function, you could do it this way. Let's go back to square. Here's square. I'm just going to open this in a separate tab. Okay. What does square do? Well, guess what? It builds a square. Okay. It's very similar. It has an X, Y, Z or X, Y, D, I should say. You can, it defines what it does. If you look at syntax, so here we have X, Y, they call it S here instead of D, but it's basically the same, which is the size of the square. So you could do that, but then you might notice that there's these other arguments and they're in little brackets, right? If you see that, what that means is that that argument is optional. Okay. And what that means is that you don't have to put it if you don't want to, but you could if you want to. All right. So actually, what this is doing, since this is a square, what you could do is round out the edges. See how they have like rounded edges here? So if you wanted to round out the edges, the idea is it's a square. So there's the lower left, or I guess in this case they call it TL and BL. Top left, top right, bottom left, and bottom right. Okay. So let's try this out. So you could put all four values. If you put one value, I think what it does is it applies it to all four sides. So I'm gonna go back to, let's go back to exercise 3, which I think is here. And so I was building squares, right? This is the square of my last square. Let's add, I don't know, 15. Let's run that. See how it's rounding out the edges there? Okay. So if you put one value, it actually is going to apply to all four sides. But then I could do each side independently. And I believe it goes top left, top right. So it goes basically kind of clockwise. So it starts here and then it goes top left, right, bottom left. So if I wanted to set different values for this, I'm just making up values here. Let's do 15, 0, 25, 5. All right. And then there's my option there. Let's say, I don't know, let's look up some new shapes that I haven't talked about yet. Like, I don't know, line. Okay. What's a line? Well, it's a straight line. Um, Draws a straight line between 2 points. What you essentially need to do is give it 2 coordinate points. An XY, which is essentially, a dot in space, and then another XY, which is the other dot in space, and then they will connect the two to make a line. So let's try that out. I'm going to make a new line. It's called line right. Yep. And oops, put a little that thing there. Let's stop this for a second. I'm going to try to make it from like here to there. Excuse me. This would be like a medium X value, like in the middle, but a low Y value. So like, I think this is 400 by 400. So like 250 maybe. And then I want it over here. And that's going to be a high X value because we're at the end and a sort of medium Y value. So like, I don't know, 375, 200. And then there's my line. Okay. So, with any of these functions, you could just look it up how you work. You know what I mean? That's why it's a reference. I don't have time, if I'm being honest, I don't have time to teach you every single function that is in P5. And to be honest, they could write more. You just have, the point of programming is not to memorize every little thing. You don't have to memorize it. You just need to know where to go to get the information that you need. And this is a good place. You're like, oh, what kind of shapes can I build? Oh, I can build a triangle. All right, how do I build the triangle? Okay, well, I need to give it 6 pieces, 6 arguments, 6 pieces of information. Triangle is kind of like is like one step more than a line, where it's like you give it the first point, the second point, and then the third point, and then it basically builds a triangle. Okay, so you don't have to just go with what I teach you in my slides or in the, in these videos. You should look at the reference and try it out. See if you can get a function to work that I haven't done. And like I said, read what it does, look at the code examples, look at the syntax of it. So triangle, where do I want the triangle? The triangle, let's put it like in the middle. So medium kind of XY, so like 200x, 175. I want the next point over here, so that's a low X value and a medium Y value, so like 100, 200. And then I want the next one like here. So that's medium X value, high Y value, so like 250, 300. There you go. All right, there's my triangle. All right, so that's just showing you, and I have this all here if you want to take a look at it. But the point here is like, okay, we can look up all of this information. And like I said, you don't have to memorize this. I don't expect you to memorize this. I don't remember every single function that P5 has. Um, Sometimes I go, hey, would it be great if there's a function that could like, I don't know, round a number or, build a square? Let's see if it has it. And if it does, great. You just saved yourself some time. You don't have to write, the code to do it yourself. You know what I mean? All right, let's talk a little more about drawing. Um, so I should have done this earlier, but essentially when you build a canvas, and you draw on it, what you're actually doing is building vectors. Okay, so this is very similar to Adobe Illustrator or Figma if you've been using Figma in other classes and such. So, you know, I'm just going to open up Adobe Illustrator for a second. I know you guys have taken like 222, I think, and like 322. So you should be familiar with using, Photoshop and Illustrator and working with vectors. Come on. Don't worry about what size. I just need a place to draw. That has nothing to do with what we're doing here. So if I were to build a vector in Adobe Illustrator, like say this star shape here, you guys should hopefully remember that vectors have two visual parts. They have the interior of it, which is referred to as the fill, and it also has the perimeter line that goes around it. This is referred to as the stroke, okay? So you might remember that you can change the fill to a color, right? And then we can actually change the stroke to a color. So right now it's currently black. I'm going to turn it to green. And you might remember that in Illustrator, you can take the stroke and you can like make it thicker or thinner and things like that, right? Well, we can actually do the same thing in P5. So I'm going to open up exercise 4. Oops. This guy left in. All right. I got 3 shapes here. I got a circle, a square, and a triangle. Okay. So you might notice that when I build a shape, it's defaultly white and as its fill or its interior color, and it's defaultly has like a thin black stroke going around it. We can change that actually. There's a function called fill, and what it does is it allows you to set the fill. Okay. So the fill function, its argument that it takes is what color do you want the fill to be? So let's say, okay, it's defaultly white. Why don't we make it say red? So I can put red. And now why did I put it here? Well, remember that computers read things procedurally, okay? So this comes before this. So what we're saying is, okay, before you build a circle, let's set the fill of a circle to be red. Then it builds the circle, and then it builds the square, and then it builds the triangle. So this is why all of them happen to be red, because at no point did we tell it not to be red anymore. So it kind of just assumes that you want to apply it to all of the subsequent lines of text or code. Now I could change this to a different color. Let's say like pink if I wanted to do that. If you wanted to be more precise, you could use a hexadecimal, as I've mentioned before, for like background. So like, let's say I wanted to use kind of this, like a light kind of sky blue here. I could highlight this hexadecimal. I'm copying this. I'm going over here and I'm pasting that here instead. Okay. Another way to do this, and I didn't mention this before, is besides, you guys are used to using hexadecimal values and cascading style sheets, but there's actually another way to measure color, okay? So in the same way that like, if we were measuring distance, like if I was gonna measure or width, I should say, let's say I was gonna measure my desk, right? I could measure it in inches and I could measure it in centimeters, right? And I can measure it in yards and so on and so on. Those are all ways of measuring distance, right? There's different ways or different measurement types. And the same kind of goes for color. We can measure color as just saying like yellow, blue, red. We can measure color as, or identify color as saying like a hexadecimal. But another way of doing that is using what's called the RGB value. Okay. If you remember the RGB, computers use red, green, and blue, RGB, colors or light to mix together to form their colors. So inside of your monitor or inside of your cell phone or inside of your television screen, there's red light, red diodes, green diodes, and blue diodes, and they shine all the light together to form all their other colors. Okay. And the way it goes, essentially, I don't want to spend too much time on this, is that it gets measured between 0 and 255. Why 255? That seems really arbitrary, right? Well, if the reason why is if you count 0 as a notch, that makes a total number of 256 possibilities. And computers are binary, which means they do really well when things are a power of 2, and 256 is a power of 2. So that's why it doesn't go to 100. So 0 for a color would be very, very dark. Like a 0 for red would basically be a pure, black. And then, I don't know, like 25 or something like that would be like a really dark burgundy kind of color. Whereas a 255 red would be like a really, really bright kind of fire engine red. The same kind of goes for green and blue. A really, really dark green would be like a forest green, and a really, really bright green would be like a neon green. And the same for blue, like a really bright blue versus like a really dark kind of navy blue, kind of cadet blue kind of color. So those mix together, and that forms the color we see here. So what that means is that, well, you could put that value here. I'm just going to make it a separate window so I can kind of see both at the same time. So what I'm going to do is type in 207, 255, 252. And you'll notice the color stays the same. Maybe I'm going to choose a different color here, like this kind of, I don't know, really dark pink. So that's 250, 62, 250. 250, 62, 250. And you can see that this matches that color. Okay. So there's different ways we can set color. If I wanted to, so in this example, everything here is purple. So if I didn't want everything to be purple, remember that code is read procedurally. So it's reading this first, and then it's building the circle. Let's say for the next thing, I want the square not to be purple, but I want it to be yellow. Well, I could just run the fill function again. I'm just going to use names because I'm kind of lazy. So essentially what's happening here is we're saying, okay, set the fill color to purple, build a circle, reset the fill color to yellow, build the square, and then that's why the square is now yellow. Okay. If I want the triangle to be something else, let's set the fill to, I don't know, blue. Okay. By the way, let's say, if you remember things about Illustrator, you can set fills to none, which means there's no fill. Well, we can do that also in the code. It's called no fill. It doesn't require an argument because it doesn't need any additional information. And so that's the result, which is it's just the outline or the stroke of the shape. Okay. Speaking of stroke, we can set the thickness of a stroke in P5, just like we would set the thickness of a stroke here. Let's say I go back, and let's say I just want a thicker stroke. So it's called stroke weight. The argument you give it is the thickness, which is measured in pixels. So if I set it to 5, that's 5 pixels. If I set it to 15, that's 15 pixels. If I set it to 1, that's 1 pixel. So you can see I could, make my strokes bigger or smaller. Just like we had the no fill, there's also a no stroke option, which means it will remove a stroke. Okay. Oops, if you're wondering why my triangle filled away, this now has no fill and no stroke. So I'm actually going to reorder this so that there you go. Okay. So it builds this before it does that. So the no stroke only applies to the square. So you can see that the square no longer has a stroke. We can also set a color for the stroke. Okay, defaultly the stroke is going to be black, but if you want it to be something other than black, if I say stroke, that means the stroke color. And then you can just set whatever color you want. So I'm going to set it to red. And you can see I'm getting red strokes. Maybe I want the circle to have a red stroke, but I want the triangle to have a green stroke. So I would reset the value of the stroke here after I've built the circle because it goes procedurally. Stroke and green. Okay. So that was exercise 4. Here it's kind of the same thing. We're just kind of playing around with strokes. I guess here it's like here's where you're supposed to, I should have been doing the stroke weight. So stroke weight 5. But then maybe after that, I want to make the stroke weight thinner. And then maybe I want no stroke on the triangle. Oops. And maybe I want to change the color of the stroke. So before I make this is the orange circle here. I'm going to set the stroke color to red. That's going to set red for everything. So let's come down here and reset the fill to orange for this. Okay. So hopefully that gives you kind of, a little more of how we can use functions to build things, to build visual things, how we can play around with colors. Okay. So I want you to try that out. That was 4 and 5. And like I said, if you want to look at that reference, you got to go to the website and you need to click where it says reference right there.